take a few minutes, talk to us about kind of what's been going on at, like, again, State Senator Lydia Edwards. And for folks here, a number of us will be in Senator Edwards's new district come this fall when you go to the polls in September or November after redistricting. We're delighted to have her now representing part of Ward 4, as well as in the Senate. So Senator Edwards, if you want to just take a few minutes, talk to us about kind of what's been going on in the state Senate, some of the things that you're working on in particular, and then I'll hand it over to folks for Q&A.
Sure, and I'll just keep it brief because I know you may have more questions. Just getting to know me as I didn't really recently campaign there, but yeah. So I'm State Senator Lydia Edwards. I represent what will be the 3rd Suffolk, which includes more of Ward 4 than it does right now. So that's why many of you are just meeting me. I live in East Boston, and I was the former city councilor for District 1, which was East Boston, Charlestown, and the North End. So that's a little bit of background. Before I was in politics, I was a legal services attorney for many years. I speak 4 languages, and I've been working in community organizing before I got into politics. As a state senator for the last 5 months as of yesterday, I was sworn in January 20th. So yesterday makes 5 months. I've been busy kind of catching up. It's kind of like sipping water out of a fire hose. I came in right before Joint Rule 10 Day, which means where a lot of the bills are being shoved either to be studied or to go into committees and to move on. So try to get onto as many bills to co-sponsor. I particularly have been focused on a lot of the housing bills. I would say, still one of the top issues for this ward committee, but also in general for Boston and Winthrop, where I represent, and Revere, and I also represent Cambridgeport right now. And those bills we're still working on getting them out, especially the most recent transfer fee bill, to get that out and hopefully onto the governor's desk. So my focus right now, along with housing, has also been climate change and the impacts thereof. And particularly I was very happy to vote for the comprehensive climate bill that came out just recently. It's in conference committee right now. I've also was very proud to vote for and then vote again to override the veto from the governor and to ultimately support driver's licenses for undocumented immigrants in the state of Massachusetts. I've been part of campaigning for that for well over 10 years. And also voted for, so just thinking of the highlights, the sports spending bill. I was happy to introduce and pass an amendment to that, specifically concerning records and expungement. I firmly believe that if we're going to allow for large billion-dollar court money in sports betting, that there are people who still have that on their record and that it should be expunged. The same kind of parallel analysis that we use for cannabis. And also voted for the upgraded Cannabis Social Equity Bill 2.0. And ultimately, we're focused right now, overall in my district, on transportation and the T. I'm the only Senate district that has all of the T lines and have that, and I'm obviously impacted when and if the FTA chooses to cut back or chooses to come back with a safety report that the T responds with cutting back service. That is an equity issue for many of the people I represent. The ability to get to and from work, to and from childcare, to and from their hospital appointments is directly T related. And I do support freeing the T, a free T, and definitely as a low bar, we should be having at least low fare or income regulated T services. So let's see. I recently came out proudly against receivership. I firmly believe that receiving any attempt by the government, the Baker administration, to take over BPS schools it's ill-informed. It's not going to end well, and I don't think in any way, shape, or form it is for the betterment of the school systems. I think ultimately BPS we just can't give up on Boston, our new mayor, our soon-to-be new superintendent. I think this is the time to actually rally for Boston Public Schools and believing that Boston can do this, not actually take away the autonomy of the city. So try to hit some highlights and some policy components. Today, I actually was on the climate change vein, and I'll end on this. I've been very much fighting against the East Boston substation. As many of you had the question 2 on your ballots, and I think 80% of Boston voted against the substation being sited in East Boston by the playground. And I today was part of I'm a intervener, I'm a party in the case. I've come in as a senator on behalf of my constituents and testified proudly against the substation and Eversource and the EFSB Energy Facility Siting Board. So I'm all in it. I'm all over it. And at some point I might be doing a cross-examination of Eversource, but that's what I do. I get in to fight, and I get in to win for my district. So I'll stop there. I know that was a lot of information. I would really just love to get to know each other a little more. Happy to take any questions.
Awesome. And thank you again so much for joining us. And as just a note to folks, that for those of you who live in the back, who are in, say, like Ward 4 Precinct 2, the kind of Back Bay parts, like along Huntington Ave, you will be in that new 3rd Suffolk district, as well as most of those of us who live in the East Fens. We'll be in that district after redistricting. But floor is open for questions. Anybody have any questions for State Senator Edwards? Carol.
Hello, how are you? It's really nice to see you. So my question is, for you as a public servant, how are you finding the transition from city councilor to senator? I mean, what are the connecting threads, and how are the two related and unrelated?
Sure. I mean, they're related in that I had good training in representing different neighborhoods where you can have conflicting interests and totally different histories and understanding of events. So I had Charlestown, East Boston, and the North End. And now I have Cambridge, Revere, Winthrop, and parts of Boston. And they sometimes are like 4 different planets. What Cambridge is interested in and their approach, let's say they're all interested in housing, but they have wildly different housing. Right now, helping Revere write their housing policy because they don't have inclusionary zoning, and they're hoping to do it for the first time. Versus Cambridge, which has got inclusionary zoning for many years and is very much on the cusp of, they just did UBI, Universal Basic Income. So you're dealing with different kinds of perspectives on housing. And I think that's actually, it's just as beneficial as it was when I was a city councilor. You are required to hear everybody and meet them where they are. And that's the job, whether it's a senator or a city councilor. It's to be present, it's to listen, it's to value that you are here to serve, and that it is a privilege to do so.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions from folks? As I always note, you can unmute and ask your own question. You can raise your hand from the hand raise function, or you can drop your question in the chat. Andrew.
Thanks, Jonathan. Hi, Senator. How are you? I had a question. There was just an article in the Boston Globe quite recently about liquor licensing and sort of the inequitable distribution of those licenses. Do you think there's any appetite on Beacon Hill to examine the issue and perhaps consider the data that has been presented and make change?
I don't know necessarily. I mean, the problem for me always, and this is from this perspective of city councilor turned senator, I have always found the fact that our liquor licensing system is set up in a way that someone that doesn't live in Boston has more impact and influence than, say, the city councilors who do, is just corrupt. And I think it, I don't know if Hill has the energy or the wherewithal, or if there is a benefit to controlling the liquor licenses in Boston that I'm not aware of. But it comes to the point where you almost want, you almost wonder if we should have RICO laws or someone come in and really like, if the state house won't, then maybe federal law will, and break up what I think is just a system set up for corruption. There, I said it on the Zoom, on Facebook Live. I think it's horribly corrupt. I think it's poorly managed. I don't know that we can do what needs to be done at Beacon Hill even. I think it needs to be totally obliterated, the system as it is.
I'll check in with one question that I have, because it's relating to two bills that you have. So you've done, or one bill that you filed, one that you've done you did a lot of active work on as a city councilor, and I assume as a state senator as well, about how at the end of the last legislative session in the economic development bill, the House and Senate were able to pass kind of a version of the Homes Act, which you had drafted, had been filed by Senator Boncory before, which for folks who aren't kind of familiar here was about creating a process for sealing of eviction records. Because currently under Massachusetts, when all those records were digitized years ago, they stay with people forever. And even if you win in court, it stays with you forever, which can harm people's ability to get housing. And also one thing I know you've been very active on as a counselor, which was able to get in, was the tenant opportunity to purchase provision, which, as folks might remember, when we had Matt Thal from the Fenway CDC talk to us about that earlier, is where if a building's about to be sold, the tenants would be kind of allowing the tenants to band together and buy the building with a kind of a right of first refusal. Baker vetoed both of those, as you know. They haven't been brought back up yet this session. I know that the Homes Act has gotten reported out favorably, I think at least on the House side in judiciary. What do you see for the likelihood of them coming up again now that we're in kind of a final 6 weeks of the legislative session, especially with enough time to deal with the governor's option?
I think it's the whole third reading in the House. All they have to do is put it on the floor. And, so I hope, I think both of them have such, especially because TOPA is, it's a balanced way of looking at how to allow for tenants to get access to home ownership pathways, which I don't know if you've been reading any of the articles recently, but basically access to home ownership for my generation and younger is virtually cut off. It's almost going to be non-existent unless your parents are leaving you the money or the house. So this is a pathway to home ownership and ownership stakes. That aside, I do believe that we're going to look at the Econ Dev bill again as one of those places for both of those, and that's where it was. They were both amended into the economic development bill, and I think in conference we're going to have to make sure it gets through, and then again be placed before the governor. But I've said, we are dealing with a lame duck governor that suffers no consequences for what he will do. So when she comes into being the governor next year, the question is really, do we want to push for watered down versions of okay legislation, or do we want to go ahead and say come January, we want the whole thing? And right now use this opportunity to get the potential candidates to be on record supporting certain things right now so we can get them to sign them into law next year. But I think the Econ Dev bill is going to be the catch-all for a lot of housing policies.
That makes sense. Any other questions that folks have? And you can, again, drop it in the chat and raise your hand or unmute. One quick thing, and if I don't know how familiar you are with both of them, was curious if you have any takes. I know that BPS announced the 2 finalists for the next superintendent. That came out earlier today. If you have any takes on which one that you think would be a better, would be very interested to hear.
Tommy Welsh, 1,000%. Tommy Welsh, 1,000%. I've worked with him in East Boston. He then became the district kind of person for my entire city council district. And, I haven't met somebody who in education administrative policy roles be so loved and respected by teachers and principals on the ground. That to me says a lot. So when they say, I want him, when I talked to the East Boston teachers, when I talked to the principals, he was the one who set up the lunches for us. He's the one who connected me into meeting more and more of the teachers and educators. I think he is, the other thing is I've been favoring having somebody in BPS. BPS. And I think the other candidate is from Somerville Public Schools. So not totally far away, but that's a school system, maybe the 10th the size of BPS. So, or at least Somerville itself is about the size of, I'm sorry, was she not part of Somerville's public school system?
She was a BPS superintendent of the high schools, and she was at BPS for over 20 years.
Okay, so I stand corrected. You have two people who have been and have experience in BPS. I do know and have worked with Tommy Welch, and I really hope he gets the job.
Margaret, you have a question?
No,
Oh, I thought you had a question.
I have an opposite view of who should be the superintendent, but I do not have, having worked with both of them. Yes.
But it'll be interesting to see as that do either of you have a sense of what the timeline is going forward then with how the finalist gets chosen?
Yeah, the school committee is going to vote on the 29th of June.
Okay.
Yeah. Interviews will be next week, and the school committee will vote on the 29th. Public interviews.
Margaret,
Yeah.
I'm interested, this is Janet, I'm interested in your view about the superintendent's job.
Well, I'm not sure the senator wants to hear what I have to say, but I've worked with both of them.
Well, if we're going to move on to that, I'm okay with signing off because I'm going to go back to a race dialogue I left
Okay.
with kids in the police. But if that's it for questions for me.
Yeah, that's why I deferred if the questions for the senator.
Yeah. What I can do is I can have you, if we have any other questions for Senator Edwards, then I can bring in Margaret, and then because Councilor Mayhew will be here in a little bit.
Can I say something, Jonathan?
Yes.
May I just want to applaud you, Senator Edwards, for the good work you're doing on climate change, continuing to do the good work on climate change that you're doing. And in the legislature, I've written to you a couple of times in this legislative session to look out for the future of heat bill and the transition off of gas to good stuff. And I know you'll keep an eye on that. So thanks very much. A round of applause for you for all your climate change work.
Thank you.
And then any other questions that folks have for State Senator Edwards? Going once for questions, going twice. Would you be able to drop in the chat just if people have any additional questions, how they can reach you?
Sure.
Awesome. And we're in the final 6 weeks of the legislative session, and it'll probably be a very busy, particularly final week if the legislature continues to act as it often does.
The only other thing I would say is we had a great win recently in front of the SJC. I was one of the few folks who filed amicus briefs for the workers actually against Uber and Lyft. Yeah. I actually represented Matahari Women's Worker Center in an amicus brief arguing, quite frankly, that the structural change that Uber and Lyft are trying to do in making only their drivers, base drivers, independent contractors is just fundamentally flawed and not belong on the ballot. And luckily the SJC agreed with the AFL-CIO, a massive coalition of folks who put in a lot of work. So I will say that there's going to be conversations coming up as we build a comprehensive legislative response ready for next year. So I'm part of that. Very excited.
Awesome. No, in terms of recent wins, I'll thank you again for the work, the advocacy that you had done as well for the Work and Family Mobility Act, which you mentioned kind of in your speech, that finally got over that kind of, I know that you've been active as a counselor in the push for that as well. And it was exciting to see the legislature pass that and override the governor's veto.
Yeah, that was great. It's a good day. So,
But yeah, any, let's see, one final call for questions, and if no further questions, I'll call for a round of applause. And then, thanks. Any final questions? Going once, going twice. Hearing none, I'll take a round of Zoom applause for Senator Edwards.
Thank you.
Thank you again. Thank you again. We're kind of delighted to have you a part of the Ward 4 delegation in the State House.
Yeah.
thank you guys. Have a good day. Bye.
And then so we will bring up Councilor Julie Louijeune in a sec. Margaret, if you wanted to weigh in with your take about, as somebody who's definitely done a lot of work in the education space, if you feel like weighing in on the superintendent candidate.
Yeah, so I would say we need a superintendent who's been a superintendent, who's worked for a school committee. Mary has the experience in BPS. She was a very senior member of the BPS staff. She is one of the few people who left on good terms, is very well respected within the BPS community, including the Boston Teachers Union. I think she would be their first choice, is interesting enough. She's tough but fair. I think she could clean the place up. He has not been a superintendent. He's been working for, by the way, in the transformation schools for Jeff Riley. When it was announced, here's what my real problem is with him. When it was announced that Brenda was leaving, he literally went around the city and said, I'm going to be the next superintendent, and I've got a list of people I'm going to fire.
Who said this? Because I'm walking into this. My Zoom just, I want to know who said this, Margaret. Who was this saying this?
You're one of your candidates for superintendent. What's his name?
Tommy Welch.
Tommy Welch. He said, I'm going to be the next superintendent, and I've got a list of people I'm going to fire. That was the week that Brenda was, leaving. It was announced she was leaving.
Well, I came
Well,
into
I'm even surprised he made it. I'm surprised with that kind of attitude, he made it this far.
Yeah.
Really, somebody who has that kind of, and I've got the list of people I'm going to fire. And that was not just me hearing it. I'll tell you, that was widely known.
Oh, wow.
Widely known. Yes.
You heard it here first, folks.
You heard it here first. Yeah. You heard it here
Well,
first.
I came in just in time then to hear the news. So
Well,
thank
you
you
knew
for
you
that
would,
little bit of
if you heard it, you were going to hear it from me, right?
yeah, so I'm glad I got it. Thank you for that insight.
Yeah.
But
So anyway, that's my,
yeah, that's interesting.
I will defer to my, my very esteemed city councilor though. Here, now that she's with us, she has always has lots to say. And I agree 99.9% of it.
Yeah.
Awesome. Councilor here, I'll bring you up on Spotlight for folks. Thank you for joining us. It's always a pleasure to have you here. I'm going to take a few minutes, talk to us about what you've been up to at the City Council, some of the initiatives that you're working on, other things going on in the city, and then we'll do some Q&A.
Yeah. So it's always great to be with family. I do feel like Ward 4 is, even though I don't live in your ward, I feel like I spend so much time learning and being in community with you all. So it's always great to see you all. Carol, I live for your fashion, so always great to be in your presence. And so, yeah, guys, this has been a very interesting 6 months into my second term. We have this new participatory budget process that we fought for during Yes on One. And so we have an opportunity this year to really flex our little muscle. And I'm really trying to learn how to navigate the waters around that process is what our office has really been leaning into, right? We hosted a series of budget pop-ups across the city of Boston, working with different community groups to listen and learn. And based on what we learned, put forth some budget amendments. There is some question about interpretation of interdepartmental advocacy that is in question right now. So we've requested a legal memo because yes, there are some questions about interdepartmental decisions that happen, but this is a new piece of legislation that has come, recently to the council. And so we have a little wiggle room to kind of push back about how we can interpret that piece of law. So we're hopeful. Tomorrow we're going to have a working session with the administration, a hearing with the administration. So we hope to learn a little bit more. I'm walking into that space hopeful. God bless you. We are also being super mindful that as a council, we really want to make sure that we seize this moment to set the stage about what it looks like when we've been given this power. And how do we do this in deep collaboration with the administration so that the tension that has previously existed against, with previous administrations, that we use this moment to really find some collaborative working models, right? And set the stage so that it's not a us versus them type of situation, which is usually what the narrative is, or has historically been during budget season. So I'm hopeful, walking in hopeful. I've already, I've been very clear that we didn't fight this hard to, pass groundbreaking legislation to then miss out on an opportunity to really flex that muscle. And so we're really looking for some compromise that really uplifts the council. So I'm hopeful in that space. And that's budget stuff. There's also some conversations around the opera funding and ESSER. So this week we're going to be diving into those issues. But high level, I've been fighting for municipal housing supports for low-income municipal employees. We have the Boston Jobs Residency, but most of our workforce struggle to make their ends meet just to live here in the city of Boston. I'm fighting for housing stipends for 19 to 24-year-olds. I'm looking at our most vulnerable populations, young people who are transitioning out of DYS, foster care, the SOAR program. There's lots of young people that we've already secured a line item for workforce development. So we need to be able to support some young people around some housing. So pushing for that, as well as some supports for immigrant businesses. There are a lot of businesses that we've learned during COVID struggled. And so what we're trying to do is build their capacity so that they learn how to navigate city services in ways that are going to help their businesses thrive. We are fighting for exponential learning opportunities for young people to learn to earn, I think it's called, or earn to learn, or learn to earn, one of those two things. But the goal really is to create a pathway for young people to have viable career options and to have opportunities to learn and earn, because not everyone could do a paid internship. Not everyone has an opportunity to do an internship that's unpaid. So we're really trying to push it in that way. And then, as you all know, I'm the chair of 3 committees, education, and we've been really loud and working against state receivership. We recently were successful at passing a resolution on the council, which had a lot of back and forth. We had to have a hearing, and then we made it happen, and there was a lot of back and forth. But that was a big undertaking from our office, and we were really happy to see that support from my colleagues. Not all of them, but we got some of them. We got them to say yes, so that was a big win. And then also we recently held a hearing on sexual assaults and bullying and harassment in our schools, and some accountability around that. And we created a trauma-informed space for that conversation. And so we brought the BPD, the Boston Public School Safety, mental health clinicians, young people, and parents. And we really got some really good feedback from everybody that participated, and really trying to figure out where do we go from here. We've also have a new committee on government accountability, transparency, and accessibility. So really have been doing some work more around the BPD, the surveillance, and how they've been using money without our permission. And so leaning into issues of transparency more on the BPD side, and also now utilizing that same framework for ELs and special education and our buses, the transportation situation that's happening in our schools. We took that conversation out of education and we brought it into government accountability and transparency, because there's a lot of data and information that we don't have access to, and we feel that that's a really good place for it. In that committee, you guys, you should know that is where the post audit will live. The one thing is to get that money, and the other thing is to hold you accountable to how you're spending it. So we're going to be utilizing that committee to really bring in the administration to really level set with benchmarks and have check-ins, whether it be quarterly. Like as soon as the budget gets approved, I want to bring everybody in and say, what's the baseline? What are we starting with? What are your goals and objectives? And then bringing people back in. How are you spending that money? Where are you at? What are some of the obstacles that you're facing? Because I don't want next year to come and then we have a series of budget hearings and I'm asking the same questions that I'm not getting any answers to, and that is frustrating. So in this committee, I hope to really lean in on that. And then the other committee that I am the chair of is employment, labor, and economic empowerment. And we've been working in collaboration with Margaret on a new law that I believe is going to get passed on the 29th, Margaret, just so you know. We're bringing it onto the floor for a vote, and it's the Fair Chance Act, where we're looking at nepotism and the barriers that Black and Brown people face in moving up the ladder. And so we worked with MAMLEO, the Falcons, who are part of the fire department, but the Black and Brown division of it, the Boston Water and Sewer Commission, Boston Public Works. Since we filed that, we've gotten so many calls from other departments that have experienced this, and we've become the go-to office for all things that deal with discrimination or people who are having a hard time moving up the ladder. So we're really encouraged by the amount of people who have come forth, and we're hoping to pass this into law on the 29th of next week, actually. So that would be an opportunity for us to really move the needle in that space. And the last piece of work in terms of legislation that we've been focusing on is, as you know, we filed an ordinance around reparations. Recently, we on the council unanimously passed a resolution for the apology, but we're still going to be working alongside our council colleagues to work out some of the questions that people have around reparations. And we want to do this in deep partnership with the administration and obviously community leaders. We do believe that we have an opportunity to really lean into this difficult conversation through this work. And we believe that our lowering the voting age, we're still, we had a working session, so we feel good about some of the feedback that we received in that space. So on the policy front, we've been very busy. And I would have never thought that I would say this, but I actually like policy. I was really deathly intimidated by it, but I realized that once you live it, you know how to legislate it. And we've been in deep partnership with people who are living the realities and or doing the work to move the policy forward in ways that is true to our civic engagement and the way that we work. So we're really excited about that. And then in terms of programming, because you all know that when our constituents call, we either address things through policy or programming, protocols or procedures. We are working with several organizations to create a capacity building fellowship program for mutual aid groups. We know that although COVID is, it's still very, the issues that people face around food insecurity, housing instability, all of those things are really real for folks. And so we're going to be hosting a capacity building symposium to build capacity of mutual aid groups and creating a fellowship program with the goal of learning from our mutual aid groups about the systemic barriers that they face. What are some of the policy issues that we need to be pursuing to support people who find themselves in constant crisis, so that we can start really leaning in to that work from a policy perspective. So really excited about that initiative that our office has been shepherding along. And then lastly, we hosted a workforce development and mental health and wellness workforce job fair where we brought employers, but also mental health providers to talk about wellness, because you can't work if you're not well. You can't be well if you don't have work. And so we created space to bring these two together so that we can have this conversation from a holistic standpoint. And people were able to walk out with resources. So we did that in partnership with a number of different organizations. So, you know, we're busy bees, and we find 101 ways to be able to be of service. And I still love my job, y'all. I just want to be really clear about how grateful I am that I get to do this work, that I get to fight for a living, and that I get to serve. Like, that is such like a humbling. I can't believe every day that I get to do this, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to do this work in the way that resonates with my soul. So I don't want to take up too much space. I think I gave you a big overview. You guys get my newsletters. They're like 20 pages long because we're all over the place and everything. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. That was a wonderful update. So floor is open for questions. Any questions that folks have for Councilor Mejia? And again, drop your question in the chat, raise your hand, or just unmute and ask your question yourself if you have it. Carol.
Hi, Julia. This is not a question. I'm just gonna grab your last word, which was soul. And I'm gonna tell you that I spent the afternoon today absolutely transfixed by the Senate testimony. And it's just breathtakingly difficult to watch and really disheartening. And now I'm listening to you talking about your commitment to public service, civic engagement, countless life-changing actions, creating policy for empowerment, developing new resources, making people's lives better. And you've touched my soul. You really have brought me up from a very low place this afternoon, particularly the two women who testified at the end of the hearings just completely crushed me. And thank you for lifting and reminding me that on the grassroots, on the local level, good things can happen.
Thank you. And I'll give you one more thing to make you happier.
Okay.
Is that I know, you know, climate conversations have always been the evolution of my revolution. And so I've been working with the Boston Cyclists Union to help them also understand that a lot of people in our community, it's not like we don't want to ride our bikes or that we have any issues with people who do. It's just that there's also a lot of trauma for folks who have experienced violence, right? Like their kids have been part of the crossfire of gun violence in our community. And so we were talking to during a public hearing with Chief White Hammond about how do we create some space for us to also deal with our own trauma as it relates to being out in green spaces and being able to be free. And I think that there's some work for us to do in that space in climate, because a lot of people of color feel so disconnected from the conversation. But if there's ways for us to help people understand that the intersection of violence and climate are interconnected, and that we can have conversations, not one or the other, because that's often how we've seen them show up in a lot of spaces. And I think that we are uniquely positioned in this moment in time to bring these worlds together. And I think that if we could do this in a way that people see themselves reflected in that conversation, then we will add more folks into the mix. And I'm thinking about young people being able to ride their bikes to school. I'm thinking about, how we minimize our carbon footprint. Look at me talking about, I know you must be incredibly proud of me that I'm using words that I've learned in that space. But I just want you to know, like, every time I think about climate, I think about you, and I think about, my journey since 2019 and everything that I've learned. And I'm a lifelong learner, and I have a growth mindset. And I think that through this work, we're trying to find those connections that bring people in ways that they see themselves reflected in the conversation.
Thank you.
Awesome. That was wonderful. And thank you for doing that good work and through a powerful intersectional lens. Any other questions that folks have?
I just want to add a compliment too, is you have a great staff. And I've worked with Jacob, the policy person, and usually staffs go, you know, we know everything. And it's a joy to work with people who are interested in what you have to say and integrate it and come back to you and say, what do you think of? You know, and it shows your leadership in them and your philosophy of including people. And I think that is a reflection of you. So they reflect you.
See why I love y'all? See why I love coming to Ward 4? You guys always gassing my head up. I already have a big head, but yes, you know, that intentionality that we have. And I think a lot of it is about humility, right? Like, I know what I don't know, and I'm okay with that. Like, I'm okay with helping people know that I don't need to have all the answers, and I don't want to have all the answers. You know, we want to work in collaboration with people who are going to help us learn, because what's the sense of walking into a space? And then that, I think that also helps other people who have not been in these spaces also feel vulnerable enough to know that it's all good. We're here in this together. And there are people who have been doing this work far longer than us. And why reinvent the wheel when there's already a lot of wisdom? And I think that is what community building is all about, is creating space for everybody to bring a bit of themselves into that process. So Margaret, thank you for helping us with everything that we've brought to you. And you all, like, whenever I come into this space, you know, whether it's a meeting or whatever it is, people come to us because they know that we can hear it. And I'm always saying, give me feedback. Like, I'm everywhere that I go, I ask people, are you happy with my work? What could I be doing differently? Because I'm making it up every day as I go, right? Like, I never had a job description. So for me, I want to continue to grow and build. And the only way that I can do that is being in community with people who understand sometimes things that I don't think about. Like, so thank you for that.
Great. And then I have any other questions that folks have. And again, drop your question in the chat, unmute and ask it yourself, and raise your hand. I'll pause. I can ask one. Since you entered during our discussion of the superintendent search, are there any priorities that you have, regardless of who gets chosen as the next superintendent? As the chair of the education committee, are there any priorities that you have for the next superintendent?
You know, I always talk about the fact that things are being done to us without us. And I really want the next superintendent to have, there are no young people in this room, are there? Some balls. I'm sorry to be so vulgar here, y'all, but like, I don't know how to be eloquent on that one. But like, I really want somebody who is going to stand up and make those hard decisions and not be about politics, because that is the problem that I see oftentimes. And I need somebody who is going to be able to stand up to the establishment or to folks who are anti-equity, and be able to really ground people who have not been heard. That is key. That is definitely something that is going to be something that I hold that next superintendent accountable to. And then the other piece of it is really, for me, because of the nepotism ordinance that we filed and we hope to pass on the 29th, you know, I want to see more people of color in positions of power, and a real effort made towards what that looks like. Not the lip service. And I find it very offensive when I hear that we don't have talent, when I know that we do. What we don't have is the political will to give talent an opportunity to step into that power. And so I'm looking for a superintendent that is going to make that a priority. And then alternative schools and voc tech. You know, I want some deep investments in those types of learning environments, and ELs and special education. I mean, the next person is going to have a lot to deal with, but if they can do their work in a way that centers people and students and really create space for educators, administrators, parents, and students and community to really guide them and to have a sense of humility to know that they can't be the end all and be all. I need somebody who's going to be able to put together a cabinet and a cohort of people that are willing to hold them accountable, not just the appointed school committee. You know, I need them to think about stakeholders, not just the people who are their bosses, but the real power lies in the people, and that ability to want to build the infrastructure for that type of collaborative, community driven framework is something that I think would be really helpful in this moment in time to set them up for success, because they can't do this without us. And I think that that's going to be really important for them to see and to recognize the value of being inclusive.
Well said. And then any other questions that folks have? And again, as always, raise your hand, drop your question in the chat, unmute and ask it yourself.
Jonathan, may I ask a question?
Yes, go ahead.
I want to see your face. I like to look at, I like to see your earrings bounce around.
Am I on? Am I on? Can y'all see me? I think I'm on.
Yes, you are. Okay. It's music to my ear when I hear you say something about climate. I'm Jackie one note about that. I have some development, open space and things like that to discuss with somebody on your staff. Is it okay to call them and make an appointment to talk about? Don't have to use time now, but to talk about some of the things that my groups and I are concerned about?
Yes, please. And I will tell you that the way that I tend to lead in different spaces that are not like, I'm not the chair of the committee on, is I really like to include like my colleagues. I know that Councilor Lara is the chair of environment and also housing. So I always like to lean in and create space for my colleagues who are leading in those spaces to really take the lead. And then I tend to support in the way that I know best how, through whatever lens I'm operating in. And then when it comes to specific development projects in different districts, I always like to lean in and work alongside the district counselors around specific things. So just so that you understand kind of like the way I navigate those things, so that you understand that it's not so much about me passing the buck, but it's really about shared leadership.
Yeah,
and recognizing, you know, and creating space for my colleagues to lead. And I like to usually play a supporting role in those spaces.
Okay. I just say that Councilor Erin Murphy has been very helpful with her staff on this. So she's another at-large person that's been working closely with the goals that we have and others. So so should I? So I'll have a conversation.
Yes, you put now. I'm competitive too, so I know Aaron's like, so you know, put my office to work, Jackie. Put us to work too. But I was just saying, in terms of if there were specific things that you wanted me to do, like I do have a process, but yes, would love to be helpful in whatever way makes sense. And we do have a team that is diverse and speaks different languages, that if there's ways that we can be supportive, please reach out to us. Absolutely.
Okay, will do.
Great. And I see a question from Lisa.
Hi, I was thinking about the superintendent search and the two people that are the candidates that we're going to be seeing this week, they have a background in BPS, which on some level I'm really excited about because they understand BPS. On the other hand, I'm concerned that they might stick with things that are happening at BPS that don't necessarily work and, you know, are kind of attached to them. And the area that I'm focused on and concerned about, and probably will bring up at one of the community meetings, is how for the substantially separate classrooms, they have applied behavioral analysis as a given for every classroom for autistic students. There aren't any options for classrooms without ABA. And, you know, this is an issue to me because the autistic community is against ABA, and the fact that there isn't an option that doesn't have it for this group of kids bothers me. And so that's just an issue that I have as, you know, something where, like, I hope that whoever comes in is open to not exactly newer ideas, but ideas that people that are like grown-up versions of the kids in the school, you know, would support. I'm sorry I'm not being more articulate about it, but
No, you are. You are. And there's this notion that if it doesn't, if it's not broke, don't fix it. But the reality is that it is broken and we need to fix it, right? And I actually spoke with a woman who oversees special education for DESE recently, and I pushed back on this whole idea on, you know, a lot of the pressure was put on BPS, but what I mentioned to her is that DESE also needs to change their framework, and they also need to create opportunities for educators to, and for folks who are front lines to redesign and to have some flexibility about what that looks like. So there's some accountability on the state level that could make it easier for folks on the district level to implement. And so she was receptive to that. And I think, Lisa, that what I've come to learn is that there, especially in the conversation throughout the receivership, is that DESE likes to do a lot of this, but they're not taking responsibility for the type of culture and climate that they've created and the type of environment that our young people are in. And that is part of the conversation. So I definitely agree that that's a great question for you to pose to both candidates to see what their vision is for out of the box thinking.
yeah, I will definitely do that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for that.
Margaret, I see your hand up.
I just gotta say, you know, when you're thinking about, you're the perfect person to pose the question. There are 4,000 kids in BPS who are English language learners with special needs.
That's right.
And there is no one trained to deal with them, because when we had this English only mandate, right, for 15 years, we stopped training those people. And the state has no certification for them. They have certification for SPED and certification for ELL. So there's no training. So we have 4,000 kids who are not being served well because the English language learners with SPED needs. And that is a state issue. They should be training people, and we should lay that at their door.
Yep.
And you know, DESE needs has a lot of responsibility for ELL kids. They really do. And they need to step up.
That's right. Well, you'll be happy to hear that we filed a hearing order specifically to address that issue through our Government Accountability and Transparency Committee. And we worked in partnership with the ELL task force, which I was appointed to before I ran for office. I was a part of that task force. And so in that space, I got to learn a lot. And so we worked in collaboration with the task force to draft up this hearing order. And I'll let you know when it's slated for the hearing so that you can provide some input in terms of who are the folks that we should ask to come in. I think DESE would be someone, the woman who I just recently met would be a good person to have her sit on that hot seat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good.
For sure.
That's good. Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Great. And then any final questions that folks have? Questions going once, going twice, hearing none. I have Councilor here from Julia. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure as always. Have a round of Zoom applause.
For you guys too, thank you for giving me the opportunity to be with you. I think more, you guys, not everybody does this. I hope you know.
Mhm.
Like, it's always feels transactional, right? Like it's always when we're running for office that people come bring us in. But I do believe that more people should be modeling this behavior because it keeps us connected to each other, number one. And then it also gives us an opportunity while we're still in office, right, to think about things that we need to be pushing for, right? So that this is what partnership looks like. And I think, Sandra, can you take a little quick screenshot so I can share this in my tweet that more people should be doing this? Because for real, like this is how we learn.
Mhm.
Everybody get ready for the camera. Okay, Sandra, do a screenshot.
Okay, 1, 2, 3, cheese.
Please.
Okay, thank you, everybody.
Yeah, I think that it's important,
Mhm.
Jonathan, and the whole Ward 4 committee, is that you guys are about true collaborative governance, right? Like it never feels like a power dynamic here, right? In the beginning, yes, when I first interviewed with you all, when I first entered the political realm, because I was like, oh my God, these people can make or break me, because I didn't know any better. But you guys made me, you didn't break me. But I think that being in deep community with you all post election is where the real relationship building happens. And I don't think that a lot of people do that. And they should. Because it is a mutual, it's a shared space, and I appreciate it. And thank you for creating it and for giving me the opportunity to be with you all. I know y'all have other people to bring through, so I'm not gonna hog up the mic, but just say thank you. Be well, have a great summer, and just keep following us on all of our platforms for all the shenanigans that I'm out here doing, okay? And thank you.
Awesome. Well,
Thank
thank you so much again.
Thank you. Okay, bye.
Pleasure.
Bye. Thank you.
I'm going to bring up Councilor kind of Ruthzee Louijeune. Ruthzee, are you here?
Hi, Jonathan.
Okay.
I am here.
Okay,
Hello,
I'm going to
Ward
put you
4.
on.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I'm going to put you on spotlight for a bit. So take a few minutes, talk to us. It's been your first kind of, let's say, 6 months in office. How's that been? But what are the big things that you've been working on? Kind of general updates about what the council's been up to. Any other things that you feel like reflections or asks or whatever you feel like sharing. So take some time for that, and then we'll do some Q&A.
Okay, awesome. I'll try not to talk for too long, but good evening, Jonathan, and to Ward 4. A lot of familiar faces on this call who I've actually, talked to during the last 6 months and have seen outdoors and have talked to about policy issues. So I think everyone on this call who's taken some time and reached out to my office, or who I've reached out to proactively to think about how we make government work better, how we make our processes more responsive to the issues that people are facing every day. And so I'm just really excited every day to have this privilege to be working on behalf of the entire city of Boston. It's a 6-month mark. We are in our second to last week of budget. So the last 2 months have really been about the budget. And, with the amendment that with what was passed, the proposal that was passed last year, we now as city council have the power to amend the mayor's budget. So we are at the point right now where we are, last week, 2 weeks ago, now we submitted to the mayor our amendments to her budget, and she now sent the budget back down with her responses to our amendments. And so right now, tomorrow we are meeting as a council to discuss the mayor's response and to also hear from members of the public their reactions to our amendments and the mayor's response, and hear from them about, and to hear from, I think someone isn't muted. and to hear from them about the things that we care about, that they care about, that need to be reflected in the budget. As the chair of the Civil Rights Committee and Immigration Advancement Committee, I've been doing a lot of work with the Office of Returning Citizens and with a lot of the advocates for that office to make sure that those who are formerly incarcerated, that we are building an office that really responds to their needs. We've heard a lot of complaints from folks about the office not being sufficiently staffed or having the resources to do the work of really helping those who are formerly incarcerated. So we have amended the budget to get more allocation with really broad city council support to get the budget amended to almost $1 million to reflect supporting that office and supporting the nonprofits that are really doing incredible work. As an attorney who's worked on eviction and foreclosure, I been really supportive and offered an amendment to the budget to increase the allocation for city-based vouchers, which is a much more flexible program than the federal government Section 8 program that was to access city-based vouchers. It's really helpful for families with mixed immigration status and folks who otherwise don't qualify for Section 8. We unfortunately have a federal government that has disinvested in public housing, so these city-based vouchers can be really valuable tools for folks who need access to housing. And thinking about other creative ways to expand that. And also, one thing that we see in the immigrant community is folks who have who have legal status still face significant barriers when it comes to becoming U.S. citizens, either because of the bureaucracy involved or the financial barriers. It costs upwards of $1,000 to become a citizen, and there are a few waivers available, but it's really hard to navigate. So we negotiated money in the budget to support the process of our residents who are lawfully admitted permanent residents becoming citizens, and supported a lot of our city councilors and a lot of the incredible work that they're doing around supporting different offices, support for youth jobs, support for more Hokies to make sure that we clean up our neighborhood. So that's the work that we've been doing around the budget. As an at-large city councilor, I try to show up in many different neighborhoods and many different spaces. This morning, I testified before a state agency against the substation that Eversource has been planning in East Boston. East Boston is one of our neighborhoods that experience a disproportionate level of environmental harm. And so I testified before the state agency, really urging them to not grant the permits to Eversource to build the substation and think about other areas to build that, such as Logan Airport, which would also be a major beneficiary of the electricity and energy created by the substation. And so we've just been, trying to do the work that the people have called us into office to do. We just celebrated Juneteenth, which was really incredible, and I had the honor of co-sponsoring with my councilor colleague, Tanya Fernandez-Anderson, a resolution that passed unanimously on the council, which I think is a big deal for Boston City Council, that recognizes, acknowledges, condemns, and apologizes for Boston's role in the slave trade and the resulting harms. So both doing the work, I think, of, the resolutions that I think that can push us towards the work of equity, and actually doing the work of making sure we're allocating city's budget and resources to doing that work as well. So I guess that's my first 6 months. If there's a map of to show where I show up, I think that map would be everywhere. And we also try to balance the work with making sure that we are creating a city and building a city where everyone can enjoy. So during the NBA finals, for example, we had Celtics watch parties in a bunch of different neighborhoods around the city, in the North End, in East Boston, in Roxbury, in Hyde Park, and join the mayor's party at Fenway to create, just to help to create a more inclusive and fun city. We've been doing a lot of work during Pride Month and providing a lot of support for the LGBTQ+ community, thinking about ways that we support the needs of the housing needs of the trans community as well. So just really excited to be doing the work and to have this opportunity every day to wake up to think about what we need to do to build a more just and more inclusive city of Boston. So happy to be here and happy to answer any questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So the floor is now open for questions. Feel free, just unmute and ask your question yourself, raise your hand, or drop your question in the chat. Any questions? I can, if no initial takers, I can see questions of my own. I'll just ask the one that since it's come up in the past year, any thoughts on the two final kind of contestants for next superintendent for BPS?
Yes. So, I mean, I heard some of the questions initially. I think, the things that give me pause too, I think it was, I'm not sure who asked the question. It was potentially, I think it was Lisa who asked the question regarding, having two insiders, people who know BPS, and, whether there's some sort of hesitation there. And yeah, it's surprising to me that the two final candidates are folks who are intimately aware of BPS, but I also hope to see that as like an added benefit as well. People who know the systems, and the first questions I ask are these folks who are committed to transformative change and who approach this work from an anti-racist framework. And and I think the answer I've gotten from community so far has been yes. Mary Skipper has done work to really make Tech Boston into a great institution. Although they recently had some struggles. And Tommy Welsh has done really great work and understands the need to center the communities that you mentioned, special education students, and our English language learners, which I think are two of our most vulnerable student populations in BPS. And so I'm encouraged by their experience. And I myself want to confirm the frameworks from which they operate, because for me, that's really important. I am discouraged by the fact that there were two other candidates of color who are finalists who are not, who dropped out of the process. And so that's something that I'd like to learn more about. But initially right now, I want to give them both the benefit of the doubt of their ability to really steer us into the right direction in partnership with the mayor and the city council. Because we have a lot of work that needs to happen. As you mentioned, the BTU, Boston Teachers Union, has been really focusing in the contract process about inclusion done right. And so the ABA strand that you were mentioning, we have to think about what inclusivity looks like for us from the students in the ABA strand classes as well. And so I think that I'm encouraged by the past experience that they bring to the table when it comes to our students who probably struggle the most, our students with limited formal education and limited formal instruction. I think I find a lot of comfort that that Tommy Walsh doesn't work in that department. So I like to ask questions before I make I say that neither of them would be a good fit. I think that, that there's potential there. And we have a mayor that's committed to really, I think, transforming our schools. And we have a city council that's committed to doing that work too and holding them accountable. What I think what the city council, what I have learned, I'll just say as a new city councilor, is that in the budget hearings process is really the opportunity to really drill down and learn from these different departments how they're spending our funds and how their level of organization. And I think it's very clear that the central office of BPS needs a lot of work, right? I'm wholeheartedly against receivership, and I testified to that extent. And I recognize that the central office of BPS is probably in need of the most help. So I think they both demonstrate really strong leadership potential. And so I look forward to meeting them individually and asking them the questions about how they think about the work they have to do in central office.
Great, thank you. And then any other questions that folks have? Again, drop your question in the chat, raise your hand, unmute, and just ask it. And I feel like I read that. Jackie.
You see my button?
I
vote
love
for
it,
you.
Jackie.
I vote for you, Ruthzee. I think you're doing a terrific job. Thank you, especially on the climate stuff.
Thank you, Jackie. Thank you, Jackie. Thank you also for being here to talk about things. There's so many on this call that I could say that about Maggie McKenna. Just grateful for being sounding boards, because I am not an expert on a lot of these issues. And I will say that because I believe that this work is done in partnership with all of you who are folks that I can bounce ideas off of and think about these issues with and really work in deep partnership. That's what I think is best about this work, is that, I have ideas and I have opinions, but it really is, turning to those who I represent and who I serve to think about how do we make this a better city for everyone?
I'll ask another kind of quick question. So I know that there's kind of the council's discussing how to spend the money that from the federal government with the kind of the American Rescue Plan, have the ARPA funding. Do you have any top priorities for how you want to make sure that the money gets used, as well as on the kind of as a complement to that, how to make sure that any good new initiatives that come out of that can be sustainable when that money ends?
Yes. Okay. So on the first question is yes, and I think that we all can acknowledge that we're in the housing crisis. I'm the vice chair of the housing committee again, and I'm also chair of the civil rights community. So I think about the intersection of those things. Also the money that we have under ARPA, we're supposed to be guided towards an equitable recovery. So I talked about the Office of Returning Citizens, about there are really great nonprofits such as Justice for Housing that's doing great work to provide housing options for those who are returning home, and they've been doing that work in deep partnership with Boston Housing Authority. And I think there are ways that we can explore and support the work that they do on two fronts. One front is on providing, they do a lot of, so the barriers that people have to housing can be twofold. One, it's about the biases that people have about certain populations and housing them. And so Justice for Housing provides a lot of administrative support to help people get housing, to help landlords take a chance on families or individuals that they wouldn't take a chance on otherwise. And also to let them know that what federal law requires, that we can't be discriminated against people based on certain activity. So it's not just, it's hand-holding and reminding people of the law. And then secondly, it's about creating that supply for housing for our vulnerable population. So that's one that I filed. And there are a lot of other vulnerable populations, like I've mentioned already, like the trans community and migrant communities that are in desperate need of housing options that traditionally fall through the cracks for a number of reasons, or don't feel safe in traditional models of housing. And so those are areas that I really want to support. And these are organizations and causes that oftentimes get overlooked when we're talking about our budget, because for a number of reasons, right? They're not the traditional nonprofits that we partner with. They're not ones who have access to City Hall. And I'm learning that access to City Hall is everything. And so, but if you're not a traditional political player and you don't know how to navigate the systems, and accessing these ARPA funds and accessing money can be really difficult. So those are some things I want to focus on when we're talking about an equitable recovery. There are still so many of our restaurants and businesses that are still struggling to recover. And I think we're seeing ourselves in a post-pandemic mode, but there's so many of our small businesses that are still there, especially our Black and Brown-owned businesses that were forced to close, that didn't have access and still don't have access to capital. I was talking to a business owner where they could have applied for a grant, but the cost it would have cost them anyway. There's so many of our restaurants that are so behind that applying for so many of the grants that are available, the cost of applying didn't make sense. And so I think about the equitable recovery in that sense. Like, of course, I think there are these free market principles, right? That there are businesses all the time and restaurants all the time that succeed and that fail. But where the failure is due to structural racism or due to a lack of capital that we can identify, then I think we as a government have a special responsibility and obligation to help them swim. And so I want to think about how we're using our ARPA money to help businesses that have really been shut out from the process and are still struggling to recover. And then I want to support a lot of the good ideas that are coming from my council colleagues as well. Second part, I'll be brief about how we sustain it. I have a lot of opinions on the things we do well and don't do well in our budget. But I think that there's a lot of opportunity to sustain the work that we do, especially around housing, based on how we bond, how we use our AAA bond rating to really lean into our fiscal strength as a city. And I also think that I think that there's a lot that we can play with in terms of how we do our bonding that will result in smaller percentages of our city budget having to be allocated to repayment of debt, right? There are different ways that we can structure our debt model, which I think is a little wonky, but I think that it really can have a significant impact on our ability to build housing and our ability to build housing quicker, and our ability to reallocate funds to things that are really important, such as the crises of the climate crisis and the housing crisis. And, you know, continuing to look at where we can be more efficient in our spending when it comes to the police budget and overtime, or whether it comes to efficiencies that we can gain in other departments. I think those are the ways that we sustain it over time. I think it's a really good question. I think that and we see this all the time, if there's something that we want to do, the money is available so long as we have the political will. And that doesn't mean that we have an infinite revenue stream, because we don't, but we are a very wealthy city. And we just, I think, need to lean into that strength and look at how we're allocating our funds to explore how we sustain things that are important, such as housing, such as, you know, making sure that we are addressing the climate crisis and things of that nature. So I hope that's a good, sufficient answer.
No, that's great. Thank you. And then any other questions that folks have? And then again, you can unmute, you can drop a question in the chat, or you can raise your hand. And I'll say questions going once. Questions going twice. Okay, so hearing them, can you just tell us, can you just drop in the chat if folks want to have a question for you, want to ask you about something, want to thank you for all of the good work that you're doing. Oh yeah. Yeah, like drop that in the chat, and then after you do that, round of Zoom applause for Ruthzee.
Hey.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks for all your great work.
Absolutely. You've been terrific. Your instincts are always right.
Major fans here in Ward 4.
Yeah.
I love you all, Ward 4. Thank you for your support. Thank you for standing by me. Thank you for throwing great parties. Thank you for I'm hoping that there's another ice cream social this summer.
There will be.
I don't know if you saw, but Roberto's is a restaurant that the Ward 4 and Ward 5 had the party at.
Oh, the Petit Robert, yeah. Or like
Petit Robert. Yeah, I knew it was a French restaurant, so I don't know why I was telling you Roberto's, but they just they put on Instagram like a reel of how fun their their outdoor patio is. So if you want to throw another party there, I'll be there. So
I have a question. I have a late question. Speaking of our ice cream social, Ruthzee, what flavor would you like us to include this year?
Oh, what's
your total favorite?
I mean, I have to be honest in that I'm obsessed with Oreos. So you know, that's a pretty Oreo, although I should be having vegan ice cream, you know, but
it is noted, Oreo.
Yeah, yes.
Okay.
Or birthday cake batter, but those are my two flavors.
Okay. Thank you.
That's a good question.
Thank you to Ward 4. Yes.
And again, a round of Zoom applause to thank Ruthzee for joining us. And then I'll bring up our next speaker, State Rep Jon Santiago. Jon, are you here?
Hi, Rep Santiago. Thank you, everyone, again.
Hey, Councilor.
Hey, so Jon, take a few minutes, talk about what you've been up to, what the legislature's been up to, and then we'll kind of turn it over to Q&A.
More than happy to. It's good to see folks. Lovely day outside. I'm looking forward to connecting. I know I've met with some of you recently. Actually, we were just with Jackie Royce just this past Friday, talking about some important stuff that she wanted to go over. But for those who don't know, my name is Jon Santiago. I am a state rep, and I represent most of South End. And it's really been an honor to do that for the past almost 4 years now, and I'm running for re-election. So we'll be up on the ballot come to September and November, hopefully. For those of you who are also aware, just some personal news, I just moved back into Ward 4. So I'm currently in Ward 4, Precinct 4. And even more personal news, we have a little one who's here with us. His name is Raphael. He's been here for 3 months. You might hear him crying in the background, but it looks like he's nice and quiet for now. But I might bring him up here before the end of this hour here. But one last thing real quick with respect to the districts. I think Jon has probably made you guys all aware, but there's a significant amount of redistricting happening across the state. Every 10 years, there's a census. We redistrict based on that census. And as a result of the redistricting and across the state, there's been a significant increase in the number of minority seats across the state. We're talking about Latino seats, we're talking about seats that are Black. And I think you're going to see a pretty significant jump with respect to the number of electeds of color, particularly Black and Latino in the State House, which is good. You know, every couple of years it's grown, and that was a caucus of about 16, I want to say now. The Senate, I mean, Senator Chang Diaz was there. Now there's Adam Gomez. Now there's Lydia Edwards. And so you've got a significant increase. I mean, it's triple. I mean, going from 1 to 3. You're going to see a similar thing in the House. But just to get back to the redistricting, I'm taking over more of the South End now. Aaron Michaelwitz, the other South End rep, actually had the biggest district in the whole state. And he is actually retreating back to the North End. I'm taking more of the South End. And as a result, I'm actually leaving parts of the Back Bay and parts of Fenway and actually going into Dorchester. So if I think a lot of the folks on this call are somewhere from 4-3, I'll be your new rep here momentarily. But I think, we'll take a couple of minutes just to go over some stuff that we've been doing in the State House. As some of you may know, we're in the second year of our 2-year term, and July 31st is around the corner. So typically this is the end of year when the bills are brought to the floor for debate. There's a lot of bills that are being passed, a lot of conference committees between the House and Senate, things being sent to the governor, some to be signed, some to be overridden. But I think it's important just to take note on what's been done, particularly these past couple years, couple months really. Just to give you a background on some of the stuff that I've been working on. And, I'm the vice chair of the COVID committee. Obviously, COVID has been somewhat of a time warp for us. I feel like, it's almost 2+ years, and, the time flies. And as the vice chair of the committee, we were very involved in giving money, supporting resources, particularly vulnerable communities, something that I care very much about, not just as a physician, but also as a person of color. Most recently, we passed about a $1.6 billion, essentially COVID recovery bill. A lot of it was targeted toward testing, masks, particularly for schools. I had an amendment in there to really focus on vulnerable communities. We are in a current surge right now. Obviously, each surge has been different in terms of the numbers and also the reaction from a policy perspective, from a public health one per se. But I can feel, not just as a state representative, but also as someone on the front lines, that this particular surge has been significantly different with respect to the inpatient hospitalization period. There's definitely been a rise in cases, but I can tell you that someone who's worked the last 4 or 5 weekends in the ER, I rarely see a COVID patient, which is good, right? It says that vaccines work. It says that people, because they were infected previously or because they're vaccinated, they're less likely to be sick, require an ER visit or hospitalization. A couple of big bills that I want to highlight. Just last week, we packed a pretty significant, robust mental health bill. As you may know, this was a crisis long before COVID-19. It has been exacerbated by COVID. I recently posted a picture on my social media that had the number of hours that patients were staying in the hallways in the emergency department. And I'm sure some of you would probably are aware of this. I mean, people stay in the hallway for hours, for days rather. And this bill is going to do a number of things with respect to funding a workforce, providing services, attempting to make it easier to get folks from the emergency department to hospitals. And as you know, some hospitals are expanding their mental health work. In fact, BMC is actually opening a whole center in Brockton. And so this bill was just passed in the House last week. The Senate passed another robust bill, omnibus bill, I want to say, maybe about a year ago or so. So my hope is that they will be entering conference committee, but there's a lot of desire to really do some work on this, formidable work. And my guess is that you'll have something not just passed by both chambers, but signed by the governor. Another important bill that just was, actually we overrode the governor on this, was the driver's license bill. Some of you know this has been a priority for many folks on this chat right here. I thought Janet Slovin is on here. She's been a big leader when it comes to immigrant rights. That bill passed the House and Senate, veto proof. Looks like the governor decided to unfortunately veto it, but that was overridden. I want to say last week. We passed a robust voting rights bill. It's made vote by mail permanent. It expanded early voting. It's going to do good for democracy. And as you know, with COVID-19, that was an opportunity to really expand the franchise. And I think a lot of lessons were learned during the pandemic that were translated into concrete policy proposals that made it all the way through. And I think the House has played an important role in that. Just 2 important bills real quick. We passed the cannabis bill just recently. A lot of it had to do with addressing the social equity piece. Another bill that was important, because Jackie's here, was an offshore wind bill. Now the House and Senate, there seems to be significant difference with respect to their beliefs on this. The Senate has a more robust bill with respect to different technologies and different renewable energies. The House is really focused on wind. So I think you can expect a robust conference committee to happen, but my guess is that something will come out. And it's important to say that each of these bills, I'd like to say that my staff and I played a role in, whether that's talking about our emergency department perspective for the mental health bill, whether that's writing a part of a social equity piece in the cannabis bill, whether that's the COVID bill and bringing the Speaker of the House to Boston Medical Center to see what's happening on the front lines and to come out with a bill just a week later. And we've played a pretty active role. On the more local level, we've been just as active. I think a lot about the issues that are impacting our neighborhood, particularly with respect to substance use, homelessness, and mental health. We've been very active in getting funds from the state to go into Mass and Cass. I have to give the mayor a lot of credit for really tackling the tent issue and expending a significant amount of political capital, which wasn't easy at all to address what's going on. As some of you know, this is the nexus of mental health, substance use, and homelessness. And the violence that I was seeing there, as not just as a resident, but as a provider, and the sexual assault, it was a pretty grave situation. Fortunately, those folks have been moved into the hotel. Now, Mass and Cass is still a hotbed of sorts, but I can tell you, because of the advocacy of the neighborhood and some of the work that we've been doing, the Shattuck Hospital, that particular parcel, 13 acres, dedicated to public health use, is now, an RFP has been put forward. And there are a lot of important, fairly reputable players who really want to expand services and build somewhat of a recovery campus. So we've been very active on that, but I don't think that's going to solve Mass and Cass on its own. My personal opinion is, and it's been, it's transformed over the past 6 months. I talked a lot about decentralization. That's an important piece, but it's one piece. We can decentralize, but I think looking at that new market area and the opportunities that abound there with respect to transportation, residential, you name it, I think it could be a piece of the puzzle that I think can hopefully address some of the issues that we have as a city. So, again, that's just a brief run through of what we've been active on in the community. The budget, $50 billion budget, it's in the conference committee stage. We were able to get a significant amount of funds for the South End, whether it's local community groups, from South End Soccer to the Southwest Corridor Park, but very active in the community. And obviously, I'm happy to take questions, meet with you guys individually, and engage in conversation. So thank you, John.
Awesome. Thank you for joining us for that update. Floor open for questions. If you have a question, raise your hand, unmute, and just ask it yourself, or drop your question in the chat. Questions going once. I can just see one. So we're now at the I'll ask and then I'll tag in Lisa's question. So we now are kind of in the last less than 6 months of the legislative session. Is there anything that's kind of like a top priority that you have to try to get done before that clock runs out for this legislative session?
We actually have a couple bills in play, but we have a pretty important one. As some of you know, we have a crisis with respect to our healthcare system, particularly the cost of prescription drugs. And we partnered, me and a rep from Somerville partnered with Senator Friedman, on a prescription drug bill. And that bill has fortunately passed the Senate. I want to say that was a while ago, and actually the Boston Globe wrote a nice editorial on it. So I'm the House sponsor of that. And so the bill passed the Senate, and it does a couple of things. It does a significant amount when it comes to prescription drug transparency. The fact of the matter is, not many people know how much these drugs cost and the marketing that is associated with that, and hence it drives up the cost of that, right? A significant amount of oversight with respect to pharmacy PBMs, pharmacy benefit managers, a third party that not many people know about, but the lack of transparency has resulted in higher costs, and just some other kind of initiatives with respect to providing insulin that doesn't allow it to be cost prohibitive. So long story short, that bill has passed the Senate. There's talk of potential healthcare bill coming from the House. And so, I'm the author of the bill in the House along with Christine Barber. And so, knock on wood, we'll see what we can do about that. But it seems to be like a priority for many people, and we've been working closely with advocates. And so that's, a bill that I've taken a personal interest in as the author of the bill. And I think Maryland, Massachusetts can be a leader for this, as it has been on a whole host of issues, particularly when it comes to the healthcare industry. So that's, an issue that I've been fairly active on.
Lisa.
Hi, I wanted to thank you this year for supporting Bill H225 to end the use of aversives and electric shock against disabled people in the state. And the bill, as you probably know, went into study. And when I tried to find out who voted in what way, it wasn't shared because it was in committee, and that's the way things are set up. So I'm just wondering, what is happening this year to end that practice? And, basically I'm interested in that changing so that it's easier to have accountability for people who just won't let bills go to vote.
Yeah, well, I think, I think some changes were made this past term with respect to that. I think, I can't recall exactly the changes. I'm happy to get back to you, but I think some significant were changes with respect to, I think they publish if you reserve your rights, I believe, and if you vote no on it, I want to say. But I can get back to you on the details. But with respect to the bigger issue, I know this is an issue you care very much about. We've chatted about this. I think you've written me a number of emails and we've gotten back to you. It's unfortunate the bill went to study. I think a lot of bills, there are about 6,000 a year. And as I said to someone the other day, it could take a while for these bills to make it all the way through. And it's not so much whether the bill is just a good idea. You have bills that are good ideas that save money, that are like these trifectas, and they still don't make it as far as they can because it's not prioritized. And so I think the goal of myself and other people to prioritize some of these bills. And I think, for example, I think underage marriages as well was one that was left on the back burner for a long time, which fortunately got over the hump this time. But I think about how we can raise, through coalition building, within the State House, outside the State House, raise these bills up and to make them more important, to make sure that the folks like the Speaker of the House and the chair, men and women of certain communities, certain committees, prioritize them.
I see a question from Carol and then Harold.
Hi, John. Great to see
Hey,
you.
Carol. Likewise.
So, our issue that goes back so many years, the dignity and death legislation.
Yes.
At our last Ward 4 meeting, we had a representative from Compassion and Choices on, along with Senator Brownsberger. And I think we got a sense of optimism from them. And then I think it was a week later, the Globe had just a dismal article and basically saying, this is going nowhere. Can you be optimistic?
Yes, I'll double check where the bill is at right now. I think this is a bill that, I can tell it's gaining some steam because I'm receiving a lot of emails in opposition to it. That's always a sign to me that, it's getting some momentum. And so the opponents typically start emailing you. So you get emails, literally like hundreds of emails from all across the state, right?
Yeah.
And, one might suggest that is a concerning sign. And I think it's one that expressed to me that there is some support for this. As you know, I support the bill. I've testified on the bill. I've written letters on the bill. I've been active on it. I believe in the bill. But there is I'll double check where we're at in the bill. I'm not sure if it's in the Public Health Committee or it's in the Healthcare Financing and where it is. But what I feel though is over the past 2 terms, I've only been there for 2 terms, that it's the interest in it and the support of it has grown significantly.
Yeah.
As you are probably well aware, I think the lead sponsor of the bill was Lou Kafka. He is no longer there. And so my concern going into this session was because Lou was no longer there and he played a significant role in leadership, that the bill would dissipate and end up in somewhere in oblivion. But good news was that Jim O'Day, another I think he's a leader. I'm sure he's an official leader in the State House and also a fairly champion when it comes to progressive policies. He is now taken the bill and really decided to run with it. And so, it's definitely a bill that I'm emailed about often, actually. And I've met with a number of proponents and opponents about it. And sometimes people aren't too happy with my responses, and it's some challenging conversations with constituents and folks across the state who might be against the policy, but I think it's the right thing to do. And so I will get you an updated, I'll make some phone calls and ask where is it in committee, and what's it going to take to move the ball forward. I do think we have the mental health bill. It looks like it's going to get done. Some bills going to get done, right? Because the House has passed a bill, the Senate has passed a bill. My guess is that some sort of healthcare bill will come out. Will it include this or not? I don't know, but that might be a vehicle for it to move forward on. But we'll look into it, and then I'll get back to you with the last update.
I'd appreciate it. I don't know. I'm also getting the sense that there's a heightened sense of interest in the legislation, and that might be because it's percolating in other states, including Rhode Island, so very close by. But I really appreciate an update, and I really appreciate anything that I could be doing.
Yeah, I'll call you this week, and we'll see. I'll give you an update. I'll be on Beacon Hill Thursday, and so I'll poke around. Aside from, you can always. It's easy to go online and see where the bill's officially at, But I think we can poke around, and ask some questions, and see. But again, I definitely, it's much more heightened. This, the Globe was writing about it, and I'm getting literally. I think it quite possibly could be the bill that I'm most emailed about these past 4 or 5 months.
Do you need more pro emails?
Oh, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, maybe a little bit more patience is what I need, because sitting in some of these meetings, and I try to be respectful and sit with some of the opponents who I have friends and that are active players on Beacon Hill in the community that I respect and I sit down with, and who express their vehement opposition to it for a variety of reasons. And is the bill perfect? Probably no bill is perfect. Could it be improved upon? And they brought up some issues, and so I think it's working its way out, and I will provide an update with you as soon as I get it.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Harold, you had a question.
I do indeed. It's not so much a question; it's a concern. John, really good to see you, John. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Harold.
Okay, good. It's not so much a question, but it's a concern, and I'm not sure if it's a legal matter or a moral matter, but I don't think there's any more qualified person to address it to. Is that whenever I go to a dentist, or for that matter, whenever I go to a doctor, I get the bill, and it says, like in the recent Crown or whatever, there was $1,800, unless you had insurance. If you had insurance, the negotiated rate is $1,400. And there seems to be something illogical about that. Namely, if you can afford the insurance, then the charge would be $1,400. If you can't afford insurance, then you have to pay $1,800. And once again, I'm not sure if this is a legal issue, if it should be allowed or not allowed. But the same is true of the medical industry. They have particularly Medicare being an exception, of course. But the negotiated rate is X, and the regular charge is X plus. And it seems to be somewhat illogical quality to that. So I pass it on to you, perhaps in moral domain, perhaps potential legal bill that could be initiated to preclude that as happening. Why if you can afford dental insurance, should your bill be $400 less than if you can't afford it?
Yeah, I think I hear your concerns there, and I think healthcare expenditures. One of my big concerns on a federal level is, we're on pace to bankrupt our country based on our, healthcare expenditures. And a part of the impetus for the prescription drug bill was this. But I think what you bring up is very similar. It's the role of the private payer in this, right? And the fact of the matter is, typically these private payers negotiate certain rates, which could be different with hospitals or certain providers. And so, as opposed to some sort of other, maybe like a public health plan, Medicare for all, whatever, where you have kind of set prices, you have these negotiated prices between insurer and provider that are all over the place. And a lot of it is based on not just, how much money we can get of it, but how much, how many patients you will feed to the system. And so, and maybe you can feed more systems, maybe you could bargain down a lower price. But the fact that we don't allow, for example, Medicare to bargain down prescription drug prices, that sort of thing, that's at the federal level, and I'm sure it's related to that. And so the role of the private marketplace in healthcare has been a big concern of mine, and I think it's one that should be addressed, needs to be addressed urgently, not just for obviously healthcare For those of you who don't know, healthcare costs are the number one reason for bankruptcy in this country. But it also leads to, bad care and bad health outcomes and death. It's such the more I dive into it, and the larger it seems to, and more perplexing it seems to be sometimes. And so I think my goal this past session was to kind of work on prescription drug prices and deal with some of the pharmacies, the insurers, some of the biotech companies, some of the manufacturers, to see where we can make some traction in this particular subject. And I can tell you there's been a lot of opposition, from big pharma, those types of folks. But I think there's a significant amount of support in the legislature. As I said, it passed the Senate. And so, we are going to cross our fingers and do the work and be diligent about this. And so we can make some moves in the House. And hopefully come July 31st, when all the bills are hopefully negotiated and agreed to and voted on, this will make it out.
Thank you, John.
Great. Any other questions that folks have? You can raise your hand. You can unmute. You can drop it in the chat. Okay, I can ask just one quick kind of tag to something else, and then a final kind of quick question, just in terms of like a kind of interesting kind of thing looking forward. So one quick thing that I push in for, that's tagging off of a comment from Lisa. One thing I'd put in a plug for is greater accessibility of information that already exists on the state legislature's website. So if you wanted to look with the change in the legislature to see who voted against something in committee, you have to go to the House Journal. And then you have to which goes kind of like a rabbit hole of finding the day that it happened from the bill page, and then knowing that you go to the House Journal and then scrolling through that however many page document. I know that I don't know how consistently they do that. I know the Senate has at times just listed it with the bill page. I don't think they do it consistently though, but the technology should exist to add a separate tab, and we just, to the extent that we can have good interfaces with our websites, the better. One just quick thing with any final thoughts on Massachusetts next year will likely have a Democratic governor, fingers crossed. Any things that you see as becoming possible in the legislature, like obviously the legislature can override Charlie Baker, but knowing that you need an override, and then all of the kind of that dynamic creates a kind of, with that gone, creates a fundamentally different decision-making environment for the legislature. So is there anything that you're excited about that you view as becoming more more possible under a Democratic administration than it has been?
Yeah, so just 2 points real quick on your first one. I think, you're right. I think in addition to my role on Beacon Hill, I'm also was involved with the initial COVID group, 4 or 5 legislators, and I've been particularly involved with some of the reopening. So for those of you who don't know, the State House is open now. And a part of those discussions, which are still ongoing, is when we are open now, how do we continue to increase access to hearings and the sort, right? I think a lesson we learned was that, people are engaged via Zoom, maybe they not be able to make it all the way to Beacon Hill to testify, to wait 4 hours in line, right? So how can you engage with constituents and with communities to increase their access to engagement? So I think, and that's kind of related to what you were referencing in your first point. With respect to the second, I'm optimistic. Despite the fact that there was a Republican governor, sometimes the concern of course vetoes arise, right? And so, I'll give an example: the driver's license bill. It was concerned for the past couple of sessions that you had to have veto-proof majorities in order to override that, right? And as a result, that probably held up things, right? I mean, this bill would have been passed a while ago, and my hope is that with Maura or Sonia, or I guess there's just 2 candidates left, right? 2 candidates left, Maura or Sonia, that won't be the case. But more than that, and I can't speak to a specific policy point, but an issue that I care about is equity, right? And the fact that these both candidates are leading through their various different vantage points on the issue of equity and talking about that in a very robust and strong way from their personal perspective, but also from their role as leaders in government, is something that I'm optimistic about. And so I think there's a lot of potential for things to move faster, right? You don't need the veto-proof majority. You don't. The governor might bring up some of these policies that really lead to that are more equitable in nature than the current governor, and hence, we're not expecting the Senate president or the speaker or those respective chambers to lead on certain issues, like the driver's license bill or like mental health, or like some of the voting bills that we put forward, right? A lot of which, components of which have been vetoed, right? Which slow down the process. So my hope is that with a Republican, or excuse me, with a Democratic governor, we can fast forward some of that, right? And not only can we fast forward some of that, but that particular candidate or that person will be serving that, whether it's Maura Healey or Sonia Chang Diaz, are pushing this in a direction and not, depending on the House or Senate to lead on a certain issue.
Great. And then any other final questions from folks? Hearing none. If you want, I think many people already have your contact info. Drop your contact info in the chat for how people can reach you. Can I get a round of Zoom applause for Jon? Okay, and then so for the final minutes of our